Our main character starts off just like any classic manhwa hero, he dies. To set the scene, he was battling an apocalyptic threat called the Liquidator. Even humanity's strongest elite champions couldn't leave a single scratch on the monster. But then he gets sent back in time, and that is where our story actually starts. Don't forget to drop a like and enjoy the ride. We open on a dark, blood-soaked battlefield ruined by war. Through the smoke, a soldier yells that they are almost at their target. Sadly, it is painfully obvious he won't survive long enough to see the end of this battle. An enemy strike rips right through his chest. As he collapses into the dirt, his final thought is a bitter regret of dying without achieving anything real. To make sense of this chaos, we have to rewind the clock a bit. Out of nowhere, a cosmic horror called the Liquidator showed up and wiped out most of the continent. To survive, humanity put together an elite strike force to fight back. The front line featured legendary elites, Brian Miller, the Ultimate Shield, Bella Albright, a brilliant sage, Jacob Bloomfield, the Divine Archer, and the Deadly Sword Saint, Amy White. Then you had the backup support units. They got absolutely no respect, filled with ordinary soldiers who were basically just sent there to die. Our main character, Gray, was one of those low-level warriors caught right in the middle of a total massacre. Watching them fight, Gray realized those elite heroes operated on a completely different level. Yet, even with that insane power, the gap between the heroes and the enemy was just too massive. The raw power displayed by the Liquidator was so insane, it made the entire support squad look completely useless. It felt like they were fighting a losing battle. The monster seemed completely invulnerable, easily brushing off every single attack the heroes threw at him. It quickly became clear that the Liquidator was just playing with them the whole time. One after another, the ultimate champions fell, effortlessly sliced right in half. Gray felt pure despair. He knew they had zero chance of winning. Strangely though, he was still awake and conscious, even with a giant hole blown straight through his chest. Right then, a strange, unfamiliar voice called out his name. It said it had finally tracked him down, calling him the host of an incredible hidden power. Suddenly, Gray was pulled into a massive cosmic void filled with giant stone pillars and glowing stars. Turning around, he came face to face with a bizarre entity that started explaining the situation. He was not dead, and his fatal injuries were already completely healed. But this creature was not the one who saved him. Instead, Gray's own body triggered a dormant power that went way beyond even this entity's understanding. Theoretically, this hidden ability could match the Liquidator's strength, assuming Gray could actually master its control. Still, the entity made no promises about actually winning the fight. Instead, it got straight to business and stabbed Gray through the chest again, which was pretty hilarious, considering it was the second time in minutes he had been impaled in that exact spot. But despite the violence, the strike was not meant to kill him. In reality, the being was injecting a fraction of its own power directly into him. Instantly, Gray snapped back to the battlefield with his new magic activated. It was completely invisible to his allies, but we can clearly see its raw power. That is when the unthinkable happened. Gray's desperate counterattack actually managed to land. For the very first time, the Liquidator looked shocked and addressed our hero directly. Seeing a tiny window of hope, Gray charged forward, throwing a wild barrage of slashes. But the counter was absolutely brutal. This time, he didn't just get stabbed, his entire body was violently sliced right in half. The Liquidator just mocked his effort, saying it was a fun distraction but time to wrap things up. But who said this fight was over? The very moment the Liquidator turned his back to leave, Lee summoned a massive, legendary blade capable of completely nullifying magic. Sheer power was absolutely ridiculous. Even the shocked Liquidator asked if the man standing before him was actually still human. But honestly, even Lee had no idea. Despite the massive impact, Lee saw the monster was still breathing. He dashed forward again, landing another heavy strike to finish the job. The hit connected, but the timing was terrible. Suddenly, the Liquidator released a terrifying wave of energy, literally dragging the moon toward Earth and plunging the world into total darkness. Despite not knowing what was happening, Lee refused to back down. He kept swinging with every ounce of his strength, but his strike simply couldn't touch his target anymore. The Liquidator mocked him, explaining that while he was in this dimension, he was completely untouchable. Then, without warning, the beast hurled a literal star straight at Lee, instantly turning his entire body into ashes. It was a bid for absolute destruction, because even if Lee could regenerate, reducing him to atomic dust should have stopped him. Yet, incredibly, even that failed to end his life. At the very last second, a brand new power woke up. This time, it belonged to a bizarre entity named Kronos, which the Liquidator recognized instantly, and he immediately started screaming and cursing at the gods, likely Kronos' relatives. But it was useless. This newly awakened magic was strong enough to send Lee back in time. At first, Lee couldn't believe his eyes. But as he looked around, he recognized his old home. He was standing in Renabo, a village wiped out 15 years ago. Seeing it whole and alive, he finally realized he had actually traveled back to the past. Just as excitement washed over him, a sharp pain in his arm cut his joy short. He remembered getting bullied by local kids back then, especially a guy named Belder. Even in his childhood, everyone had treated him like a complete loser. It was deeply frustrating to realize he was still so weak. With an entire apocalypse to prevent, how could he ever hope to stop the Liquidator if he couldn't handle simple village bullies? Even with a legendary power waking up inside him, Lee still hated getting hurt and lacked any real confidence. A bit later, while walking through the woods alone, he crossed paths with Belder again. The confrontation was immediate and aggressive. Before they could even talk, Belder tossed him a sword and demanded they have a quick sparring match. Lee tried to back out, but Belder refused to listen, claiming the swords were completely blunt and harmless. Still, Lee tried to protest that he wanted no part of this, but it was already too late. Belder charged right at him, sending Lee into a panic. He screamed that he couldn't even grip a weapon properly because of an old childhood injury in his arm. It only proved what he had secretly believed deep down inside. From day one, he was just destined to be a loser. Yet, even as he yelled about his weak arm, Lee somehow managed to dodge the incoming strike. It made zero sense. Either Belder was moving in slow motion, or Lee had somehow gotten much faster. The truth was simple. Even inside this weak, untrained teenage body, he still possessed all the battle experience from his previous life. Using that incredible advantage, he easily disarmed Belder in a flash, proving that he wouldn't have to suffer against small-town thugs anymore. Knowing this, Lee realized he had absolutely nothing to worry about, since fighting with a dull-practiced sword meant he couldn't accidentally kill or seriously injure anyone during the fight. That realization gave him the freedom to fight without holding back. But on his next swing, which was meant to be a harmless stab, the metal sliced right through Belder. Lee panicked. A blunt training sword was never supposed to draw blood like that. Feeling highly annoyed by the chaotic situation, Lee lunged forward and smacked Belder straight across the face, sending him flying. Walking over, he scoffed at the bully's dramatic crying, pointing out that Belder was the one who swore this weapon could not cut anything, so he had no right to complain. Embarrassed and terrified, Belder completely panicked. Losing his mind, he threw a total tantrum and screamed for his gang to help. They rushed to attack, but Lee only smiled. A second later, the entire squad was utterly wrecked, groaning on the dirt around him. Standing over them, Lee asked if they belonged to the Sarya Sword Dojo. Belder nodded, whimpering that you needed a special recommendation just to get in. He bragged that they only left because they were already too powerful, but Lee stared down at him and said they were nowhere near strong enough. Moving past that, Lee demanded a recommendation to the dojo, but Belder stuttered and said it was impossible. He whined that telling his master he got beat up by a random stranger just to beg for an invite would be way too humiliating. Still, after witnessing Lee's overwhelming strength firsthand, Belder folded under the intense pressure and agreed to do it. Once they reached the city gates, Belder asked why he wanted in so badly. Lee explained that every dojo holds a golden ticket to the main academy. His plan was to secure that single spot and climb his way in. One of Belder's buddies remarked that Gray's sword skills were already good enough to get him in without any recommendation at all. But Gray knew things weren't that simple. Sure, he felt powerful now, but he vividly remembered how humanity's greatest warriors were wiped out in a single hit by the Liquidator. In his final moments, he had tapped into that strange power sleeping inside him. But even that fell short of saving everyone. Because of that, he knew he had to become vastly stronger. This second chance to travel back in time was his only shot at changing history. And thankfully, hope was not entirely lost. Right before he died, Gray had actually learned to control that dark power, all thanks to lessons from the legendary Sword Saint. It proved that if he mastered swordsmanship and reached the level of those legendary heroes, his next battle against the Liquidator might end very differently. Shaking off the memory, they reached the dojo, only to find trouble already waiting. Master Sarya was screaming at her students for losing a fight to an unarmed guy. She was known as the chief instructor of the Sarya Sword Dojo. Belder tried to stammer out an excuse, but a brutal slap sent him flying backward. Sarya made it crystal clear. If they thought jumping a defenseless person was training, then the beating she just gave them was also part of their lessons. But she still refused to forgive them. Right then and there, she announced that every single one of them was expelled and warned them never to call her master again. Ashamed and speechless, the students slunk away. Once they were gone, Sarya walked up to Gray and apologized for the misunderstanding. Word had reached her that he wanted a recommendation letter for the academy. She offered to write it to make amends. But first, she had to test his swordsmanship. Gray accepted without a second thought. As their duel started, Sarya was instantly taken aback. His style was messy, but incredibly effective. Facing him felt like battling a veteran who had survived countless life or death fights. One moment, he seemed self-taught, and the next, trained by a true master. He was a diamond in the rough, But then things took a turn. Surya tried to bring the duel to a close, but realized she couldn't. Gray matched her step for step. As an elite instructor, she was being pushed to go completely all out against a guy who was supposed to be a total beginner. Even worse, a cold fear started creeping in. The kid standing in front of her was definitely not normal. Suddenly, Gray unleashed a bizarre strike that blasted her backward, forcing her to retreat several meters. Though rattled by the pure impact, she tried to exploit his opening and strike back immediately. But before she could move, she realized her sword had been sliced clean in half. Worst of all, she had no idea when it even happened. Meanwhile, Gray realized he had tapped into that bizarre power again. The feeling was identical, but this time, it came with a brutal backlash. His physical body just couldn't handle the raw power he had unleashed, leaving him barely able to stand. Still, he pushed through and insisted he was fine. But he wondered, should he tell Surya about this power? He weighed his options but decided to keep quiet. After all, he couldn't even control this force yet. There was really no point in explaining something he didn't even understand himself. As for Surya, she was visibly shaken. She knew it was impossible to slice through a wooden sword using another blunt piece of wood. The fact that Gray stayed completely silent about the whole thing made it obvious he was hiding something. Still, putting the mystery aside, Surya asked again if he really wanted to go. She warned him that the Royal Academy of Swordsmanship was incredibly brutal. But then, she dropped a bombshell. She told Gray he simply wasn't ready yet. Hearing this didn't shock Gray. Deep down, he already knew his current strength wouldn't be enough. But as it turned out, he had jumped to the wrong conclusion. Surya went on to explain that the place he actually needed to aim for wasn't just some elite local school, but the prestigious Unified World Academy widely recognized as the absolute best on Earth. That was the very school where those legendary heroes who fought the Liquidator in the final battle had trained. Gray was completely stunned. He asked how someone like him could ever hope to get accepted into a legendary place like that. Surya answered bluntly, telling him that right now, it was impossible, and she knew Gray was already well aware of that. His body was still far from that of a real swordsman. Sure, with pure hard work and dedication, he might stand a chance at the Royal Academy. But the prestigious World Academy operated on a completely different level. She warned him that right now, he wouldn't even survive the first stage of the entrance exam. Deep down, Gray had to agree. Every single graduate from that academy was basically a monster warrior operating on an entirely different tier. Even so, seeing the expression on his face, Surya asked if he was already throwing in the towel, especially since there were still 5 months left before the exam. She admitted that 5 months might be tight, but she needed him to put his complete trust in her. At the same time, she made it crystal clear he had to be ready to suffer. Those 5 months would be absolute physical and mental hell. Hearing that, Gray realized that if he didn't fight with everything he had now, he'd never get another chance. So, he accepted the challenge. And it really was pure, unadulterated hell. Every single day, he was forced to eat bizarre food, endure grueling training the moment he woke up, and push himself until bedtime. The days slowly piled up, and 8 months flew by. By then, Gray had completely transformed. His body was strong, and his swordsmanship had grown much sharper. Surya even admitted she had absolutely nothing left to teach him. He was in peak shape. With 1 month left until the academy entrance exam, she suggested traveling early to get used to the new environment. Surya even handed over some pocket money so he could enjoy the journey and explore the local region. Seeing this, Gray joked that the way she was acting made it look like she just wanted to get rid of him. Surya immediately denied it, claiming that wasn't true at all. But Gray looked at her seriously, bringing up rumors of a nearby ogre nest while their village was left completely defenseless. Hearing those words, Surya instantly stiffened. She tried to brush it off, claiming there was absolutely nothing to worry about. Reinforcements were supposedly coming from the capital. Still, she couldn't stop the heavy tension settling over them. Something felt wrong. Gray suspected this rushed farewell was about a lot more than just some school entrance exam. Deep down, Gray knew she was lying. Having lived through the future, he was absolutely certain no help would ever reach this village. Worse still, he knew that right before the village was completely wiped out, Surya would lose her life. If that happened, she would be gone forever. Accepting this reality, Gray simply told her it was fine and that he would get going. He thanked his master for everything she had done to help him. But as soon as night fell, Surya slipped away toward the location of the ogre nest. Tracking a trail of fresh blood, she knew she was on the right path, but a sudden voice asking where she was going startled her. Looking up, she saw Gray standing right in her way. She demanded to know what he was doing here, since he was supposed to be heading off to the academy. But Gray explained he had hung back in the village to see if those royal troops would actually show up. And, just like Surya admitted, they had ignored the village due to some emergency elsewhere, which was exactly why she had chosen to handle things on her own. She insisted it was doable because a scout's report claimed there was only a single elite ogre at the site, with no other monsters around. One elite ogre was a target she could handle, but Grey knew the real danger of these monsters lay in their high intelligence and tactical coordination. Because of that, raiding the nest alone was pure suicide. He knew with absolute certainty that if he let his master go alone, she would die, just like last time. So, Grey asked to go along, but Surya shut down the idea immediately. Still, he pushed back, arguing that he needed real combat experience. This was his chance to learn. Did she really see him as a burden? Surya insisted that he wasn't a burden at all. But in live combat, especially within an active nest, anything could go wrong in an instant. Even with her strength, she couldn't guarantee anyone's safety out there. Since she kept refusing, Grey threatened that if she didn't bring him along, he would fight her right there, knock her unconscious, and handle the beast nest alone. Surya had to laugh at the ridiculous threat and finally agreed on one condition: he had to survive. Grey smiled and told her she had to make the exact same promise. With their pack made, the two headed straight for the nest. Once they arrived, their immediate priority was to keep a cool head. Ogres are surprisingly clever, and making a reckless move now could get them killed. Scanning the camp, they spotted several monsters gathered around, but none looked like the leader. Perhaps the boss was hiding inside one of those tents. They couldn't just stand around, so they split up. Surya struck from one side while Grey flanked from the other. The moment Surya made her move, she drew the attention of multiple beasts. Right on cue, Grey jumped into the fray. Working together, they cleared out the monsters with absolute deadly precision. Once the dust settled, Surya praised Grey. She found it hard to believe this was actually his first real life or death battle. But Grey couldn't celebrate. Something felt completely off. These monsters were far too weak. He couldn't fathom how his powerful master had ended up losing her life here in his past timeline. As he pondered, Grey glanced toward one of the larger tents and spotted two glowing eyes staring back from the dark. Pure, primal fear gripped him instantly. He yelled at her to run, and though confused, Surya followed him immediately. But they weren't fast enough. A massive, elite ogre suddenly blocked their escape. Surya muttered that they were honored to meet the chief, but Grey warned her that this wasn't the real boss. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed from behind them. The thunderous sound seemed to instantly empower every remaining beast in the area. The presence showing itself was way stronger than any elite ogre. It was him, the true boss of the nest, the ogre general. Now, Grey finally understood why his master died in his past life. It was no simple mistake. She had faced the wrong enemy entirely alone, with no backup against a threat left out of the report. History was repeating itself, but this time he was here, and maybe, just maybe, they could change the ending. They obviously could not fight those beasts head-on, so Surya lunged directly at the elite ogre, hoping to carve out an escape route. The strike actually connected, landing a direct hit. But the real problem started when the ogre healed its wounds instantly. Grey knew that the general's roar had buffed the monsters, boosting both their strength and regeneration. After a short clash, Grey realized that if they kept this up, it was only a matter of time before they were wiped out. Knowing this, he asked his master to cover the rear and buy him some time. They had only one real option left: take down the ogre general. But to get to him, he would have to cut through every single monster, blocking his path. On top of that, he had another crisis. His main sword could no longer handle these empowered ogres. He still had a backup blade, and Surya had tossed him another, but neither weapon was strong enough to wipe out the whole horde and still fight the general. To make matters worse, the boss roared again, making the surrounding ogres even stronger. From there, things went downhill fast. With each new monster, the fight got harder. Even so, Grey dodged, slashed, and forced his way forward. But the monsters soon closed the gap. He took a heavy blow, got thrown across the field, and took massive damage. To make things worse, he was down to a single sword. How could he possibly defeat an entire horde and the general with just that? Knowing they were out of options, Grey screamed at Surya to run. But she refused. Not out of some desire to die with him, but because her leg was badly injured and she could not even run. Hearing that, utter despair washed over Grey. He started to think he had traveled back in time, reliving everything, just to die right here at the very start of his new life. But after a brief moment of silence, he remembered he still had a trump card. If he could tap into that insane power from before, it would change everything. Even though seemingly invincible monsters could be completely wiped out. Focusing and remembering how it felt last time, Grey channeled that overwhelming power. In a flash, he effortlessly sliced through every ogre in his path. The attack was so unreal that even the injured Surya asked what was happening. But Grey just told her everything was under control. His attack was so devastating it did not just kill the common ogres, it literally split the general in half with one blow. With the general dead, the rest of the ogres lost the magical boost that had made them so strong. This instantly turned the tide for Surya. She seized the opening, slicing the elite ogre into 3 clean pieces with a single strike. Working together, the two of them cleared the entire nest of ogres. Grey began to apologize for breaking her backup sword, but Surya quickly told him it was fine. The moment he handed the shattered blade back to her, his body finally gave out, and he collapsed, completely unconscious. In his mind, Grey stood before a massive, locked door. The surrounding area felt bizarre, and the energy coming from inside felt strangely familiar. He instantly knew that this place and its energy matched the power he had unleashed earlier. It did not take long to realize that if he opened that door, he could harness that destructive power whenever he wanted. But that was just in theory. The second he stepped toward the door, a heavy aura of death forced him to back away. It was pure instinct. He knew for a fact that touching that door would kill him on the spot. As he stood there, hesitating, a deep voice echoed from the depths of his soul, telling him he made the right call. Right after that, Grey snapped awake. The first thing he saw was Surya, looking completely relieved. She explained that they were in the village clinic, and that he had been out cold for 5 whole days. Hearing this, Grey muttered that he must have pushed himself way too hard. But remembering the insane power of that final attack, he realized that pushing his limits did not fully explain what had just happened. He tried to move, only to realize he had 0 strength left in his right arm. On top of that, his bruise was morphing into strange, disconnected symbols, runes that apparently only Grey could actually see. But putting that aside, he had a much bigger problem. He couldn't move his arm. The reason was brutal. He was told every single bone in his arm had been shattered to pieces. Yet, he felt 0 pain. They explained they had treated him with a high-tier magic potion, a rare and incredibly expensive cure. Grey was stunned, but things got even more confusing when he learned the village chief himself had provided the rare medicine. He couldn't fathom why anyone would waste such a priceless treasure on him. When he asked, Surya gave a simple answer. He was now the village hero. Before Grey could sort out his thoughts, the chief walked in, looking incredibly relieved to see him awake. Grey tried to express his gratitude for the potion, but the chief waved it off immediately. After all, he had killed an ogre general, a beast that entire armies from neighboring cities couldn't even scratch. So, giving up that potion was the absolute least they could do. Grey thought the old man was exaggerating, but looking back on his past life, he knew this village had been completely wiped out by that monster. But this time, history had changed. Putting those thoughts aside, the chief mentioned hearing rumors that Grey would attempt the entrance exam for the Unified World Academy. That hit Grey like a truck. A week had passed since the battle started, and he had been asleep for 5 days. With the journey to the academy taking 3 full days, he was suddenly in massive trouble. The exam was in only 2 days. He was literally running out of time. Sure, a fast horse could get him there, but buying or renting one cost a small fortune, and his pockets were completely empty. But before Grey could even open his mouth, the chief beat him to it. He already knew Grey would need a ride, so he secured the absolute fastest stallion in the village. Surya even joked that if he hadn't woken up, they would have dragged his unconscious body there anyway, just to make sure he didn't miss his shot. When Grey finally stepped outside, he was stunned. The entire village had gathered around the horse waiting for him. They cheered, thanking him and calling him their true savior. And to his shock, they had pooled their own money together to give to him. They knew the academy's application fee was steep, and they wanted to ensure he got his chance. The gesture moved Grey deeply, and he thanked them from the bottom of his heart, joking that failing now would be too embarrassing. But Surya brushed his worries aside, reminding him that none of the other candidates had ever taken down an ogre general. That achievement put him in a class of his own. But Grey pointed out that his right arm was still useless, and even with his left hand, he doubted he could pass in this condition, especially without relying on that strange power he had unleashed before. But Surya told him not to worry. The academy's instructors would spot his raw talent, flashy magic or not. In her eyes, Grey was already more than ready to pass. He couldn't tell if she was encouraging him or just adding pressure, and the heavy weight of expectation grew. Yet, looking around, he realized one thing: something had shifted. This very village, which had been burned to the ground before, was now thriving, all thanks to the immense power he now possessed. He had proven that fate could be rewritten. The very next morning, Grey mounted his new horse and set off toward the academy. Thanks to the beast's incredible speed, he made it just in time. Stepping onto the grounds of the Unified World Academy felt like entering a massive, chaotic anthill of active candidates. It was a massive ocean of hopefuls, every single one of them fighting for a spot. Excited chatter buzzed from all directions. In short, people were saying the number of open slots changed every single year. Some years they accepted 50 students, other times they took only 1. As the crowd anxiously gossiped about what was coming, a red-haired woman suddenly materialized before them. Without uttering a single word, she snapped her fingers and instantly unleashed a massive spell. A glowing parchment floated in front of every candidate, displaying only two things, their ID number and assigned test course. She announced that this was the standard routine every year. No one cared about names, birthdays, or backgrounds. The Unified World Academy ignored age, gender, social status, or nationality entirely. Actually, nobody even cared about the candidate's name at that point. The academy only wanted names after they passed the exams. Until then, you were just a number and a class. When Gray looked at his sheet, he froze. They had assigned him to the swordsmanship class, even though his right arm was totally useless and his main sword was missing. Talk about cruel. But right then, as if reading his mind, the redhead explained they sorted everyone purely by how they looked physically. She told them that if she made a mistake, they should raise a hand and speak up. Nobody moved. The hall stayed dead silent, which suggested that her weird choices were actually spot on. Next, she wrote down the exact time for each person's test. Gray looked down and saw his exam was scheduled for the very first day at 11 in the morning. Panic set in. He desperately needed more time for his broken arm to heal up, but the instructor warned them that tardiness meant instant failure. Show up late, even by a second, and you were disqualified immediately. And there was zero chance of changing the schedule. With no other choice, Gray had to pray for a miracle, hoping his arm would somehow heal by tomorrow. No such luck. When morning came, his right arm was still dead weight. He would have to fight his battle like this. Even though he was far from perfect shape, he couldn't let negativity take over. Look, his left arm still worked just fine, and he was ready to play the hand he was dealt. Since he had some time before his name was called, Gray decided to watch the other matches. He wanted to analyze how the examiners fought, hoping to find a weakness to exploit. But the very first duel made him freeze up in fear. One challenger lunged at the examiner with a powerful, straight-on strike, but the examiner slipped past it effortlessly. A few more desperate swings followed, but he was totally outclassed. With just two simple moves, the examiner threw the kid right out of the ring, ending it in total humiliation. Watching that crushed Gray's confidence, leaving him totally shaken up. How could he beat an opponent like that, with a broken dominant arm and a cheap backup blade? Still, he had no time for second thoughts. It was his turn. He stepped onto the battlefield, carrying a heavy weight of dread and nerves. He was clearly outmatched, but he resolved to throw everything he had into this single fight. Fortunately, the examiner let him make the first move. This was a golden opportunity if he played it right. Fighting through the fear, Gray steeled his resolve. Gripping that cheap sword in his left hand, he prepared to strike with desperate courage. Remembering what Surya had once taught him, a true warrior swings their blade using the power of their entire body, not just their arm. But right now, Gray had to pour every ounce of strength into his single good arm, hoping for a clean hit. His swings were awkward and off balance, relying purely on raw muscle power instead of smooth form. The examiner sidestepped his first attack effortlessly, proving that clumsy swings wouldn't cut it here. But when the examiner swung back, Gray noticed something strange. The man's movements felt slow. He was nowhere near Surya's terrifying speed. Even so, the examiner possessed absolute, crushing physical power, and whenever Gray tried to block a hit, the sheer force of the impact rattled his bones. Sensing this, Gray realized the battle might actually be more winnable than he originally thought. Spotting a quick opening, he unleashed a fast flurry of strikes. This threw the examiner off balance. Suddenly, Gray remembered his master's confident promise that he would pass. The memory fired him up. Hearing those words from someone as gorgeous as Surya gave him a massive burst of energy. The clash raged on. He had figured out the examiner's basic patterns, but that raw power difference was still a massive wall. There was just no way for Gray to break his opponent's rock-solid guard. But slowly, the examiner's rhythmic pacing began to slip. His swings grew wild and sloppy, creating a perfect opening. As the examiner lunged forward with a heavy strike, Gray slipped right past it. He was poised to land a precise counter-strike when a loud voice yelled for them to halt. The fight was done. Time had run out on the exam, ending the match in a draw. Gray could only sigh in disappointment. He gave it everything, but a tie still stung. At least there was always next year. By then, his arm would be fully healed and ready for another shot. He thanked them and accepted the outcome with quiet respect. 1 week later, the evaluators gathered inside meeting room number 53. An elderly man, probably the academy director, asked for an update on the exams. A few teachers complained about the exam format, arguing that testing students one by one was way too slow for such a huge crowd. But the director cut them off. He wanted to hear about the students, not complaints about the system. To keep things moving, he brought up the swordsmanship course first. The records showed that candidates 5, 217, and 753 passed. The rest fought well, but lacked the skills for advanced classes. The director asked if anyone else caught their eye, but the evaluators remained silent. As the meeting was wrapping up, a red-haired girl spoke up, asking about candidate 513. The instructors decided to pull up the video and review his duel against the examiner. Watching closely, they noted that if the boy relied only on traps to win fights, he would struggle down the road. He was smart and worked hard, but his style was just too limited for this academy. His technique was solid, but he still lacked the raw strength. Ultimately, the evaluators reached a verdict. Gray was simply unfit. Hearing that, the red-haired girl scoffed, saying if they were all this blind, then judging every single candidate this way was a total waste of time. The following morning, the official list of students accepted into the swordsmanship course was posted. Candidates 217, and a few others made it, but candidate 513, Gray, was left off. He stood there, stunned, realized he had actually failed. But before he could spiral, a second announcement appeared. This one was for a special admission class called Divine Eye. Right there, Gray saw his own name, which only left him more confused. He had no idea what it meant. As he struggled to understand, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. A few students laughed, whispering that someone must have pulled strings for him. That made Gray uneasy, wondering if his master, Seria, actually had that kind of pull at the World Academy. But his thoughts were interrupted by an old man who explained the truth. Admission was not a favor or some trick, but an elite category created over 100 years ago that had produced some of humanity's greatest heroes. Despite its age, it commanded immense respect. The man listed several elite candidates who entered the academy the same way in recent years. Amy White, Belle Albright, Brian Miller, and Jacob Bloomfield. These were the exact same legendary heroes that Gray had encountered in the future. In other words, entering the academy under the exact same title as those legendary figures meant his own name might eventually stand alongside the greatest heroes in history. Before long, the day of the entrance ceremony finally arrived. The students gathered in their fresh uniforms, each bearing the crest of the specific department they had been accepted into. But once they arrived, a white-haired man informed them there would be a brief delay while they finished the setup. Because of this, he politely asked the crowd to step back a bit. Once the space was clear, the white-haired man conjured a massive teleportation portal, and out of it rose a colossal structure, looking like an ancient Roman Colosseum. The sheer scale of the summoning magic was so staggering that many students stood frozen in awe. Gray realized this was a deliberate show, a clear way to demonstrate the power of the World Academy. Looking around, he quickly realized, along with the other students, that there were far too many chairs set up. The seating arrangement made no sense for their small group, considering only about 30 of them had passed. Someone pointed out there were over 300, maybe even 3,000 seats. Just then, a nearby girl offered an explanation. The World Union Academy, true to its name, brought together the absolute best students on Earth. This grand ceremony and the massive arena weren't just to impress a few newcomers, but to welcome a massive wave of candidates from different nations, all gathering in one spot to reach the absolute pinnacle of power and knowledge. The other students hadn't arrived yet, but moments later, they floated in aboard a magical vessel shaped like a giant hot air balloon. Still, Gray recognized it instantly as the Strato Queen, that legendary magic airship. He knew the vessel well, since the heroes of his past life had sailed it to battle the Liquidator. Once the rest of the students arrived, the entrance ceremony finally got underway. It was a typical ceremony. The headmaster delivered a long, traditional speech packed with boring rules and formalities. Right on cue, they called up the top student from each department. Representing the swordsmanship division was a boy who had instantly taken down his examiner. His name was Leonhard Appius, though most just called him Leon for short. Interrupting the speech, Leon boldly asked if he could speak his mind. With the instructor's nod, he began his speech, immediately launching into a harsh critique of the academy. He argued that while many earned their place through hard work, there was one person who simply didn't belong. He was talking about the Divine Eye special admission pathway, pointing his finger directly at the choice made by Ariel, the red-haired woman. Ariel defended them calmly, stating that every student had passed tough exams, and being weaker than others was no reason to lock them out. But Leon quickly clarified he wasn't talking about the regular students. In his eyes, the real problem was the mystery student she had sneaked in through the back door. Right then, Leon demanded that this student drop their uniform, pack up, and leave, declaring they had no right to be there. Hearing this, Gray finally realized why Leon was so incredibly furious. Fortunately, Leon had no idea who Ariel's recruit actually was. Ariel simply smiled, noting how lively the freshman class was this term. Before Leon could utter another word, she baited him, asking if he honestly thought he was stronger than her pick. Gulping, Leon spat back that he was, unless he had misjudged. To settle it, Ariel proposed a wager. She would risk her own job alongside the student's enrollment spot. This caught both Gray and Leon off guard, leaving them completely baffled. Leon asked if she wanted them to duel, but she dismissed the idea as barbaric. She added that if her student actually fought seriously, Leon would likely die. She wasn't trying to rile him up, she was deadly serious about it. Instead, the bet would involve hunting monsters, which was safer. Ariel noted that Leon excelled at slaying beasts rather than fighting people. The challenge was simple. Both boys would have to defeat monsters she selected as targets. Each round, the creatures would grow stronger. The first one to fail a hunt would lose the bet. If Ariel's student fell short, she would resign from her position as professor, and every other student she had admitted would be expelled. But if Leonhardt lost, he would have to obey any command Ariel gave him, no questions asked. Hearing those stakes, Leonhardt muttered that he might agree, but it all depended on which monsters they faced. He didn't want to walk blindly into some cheap, rigged trap. He needed to know exactly what he was up against. Sensing his doubt, Ariel proposed an ogre general as the very first target. She playfully asked if that would be too easy for him. Hearing this, Gray wondered why Ariel picked that exact monster. Meanwhile, Leonhardt grew angry, knowing that such a beast was impossible to defeat alone. Ariel, however, explained that she was not asking him to defeat the monster immediately. Because of that, she set a generous time limit of 1 year, giving them plenty of time. Still, Leonhardt believed that even with a full year, facing such a monster head-on was suicide. But then he realized she was deliberately picking an opponent that neither of them could ever beat. That way, the challenge would end in a safe draw. Sensing his thoughts, Ariel threw in a final twist. If it ended in a tie, both of them would lose. If either of them failed, the consequences would be severe. Trapped by her rules, Leonhardt had absolutely no way to back out. He figured Ariel was out of her mind, since the match seemed totally rigged from the start. He demanded that she wouldn't use some weakened, half-dead ogre general, to which Ariel replied that went without saying. To lock in the terms, she conjured a magical contract, which Leonhardt eagerly signed right away, believing he had already won. Nearby, several teachers whispered, wondering if Ariel was just looking for an excuse to retire. Gray, however, was left deep in thought, wondering how Ariel knew his pre-enrollment fight was against an ogre general. Plus, he couldn't grasp why she had chosen exactly 1 year as their ultimate deadline. Looking over at her, he saw Ariel just smile, quietly signaling with her eyes to keep his mouth shut. To be honest, the wager was already decided the very second she opened her mouth. Once that drama settled, classes kicked off immediately. The first lesson covered magic fundamentals, since the World Academy motto made it clear there was no time to waste. Starting from scratch, the professor explained that everyone carries an invisible energy source called ether, and by channeling it through their magic circuits, they could cast spells and pull off all kinds of other magical techniques. Listening to the lecture, Gray realized he could follow along easily. He had already mastered all this during training sessions in his past life. The only real issue with the class was that he had ended up placed in the exact same group as Leonhardt. It wasn't a massive deal though, since nobody in the room knew he was the special admission student chosen by the Divine Eye. But as he was thinking this and glanced over at Leonhardt, the teacher caught him and assumed he was rolling his eyes, thinking Gray was just being disrespectful and way too cocky. The instructor called him out, assuming Gray felt he was already too advanced for the class. Gray quickly explained that since this was a swordsmanship class, he figured there wouldn't be any issue if they just skipped the magic part. But the professor immediately shut that down, making it clear things didn't work like that. He pointed out that even in close combat, fighters team up with mages. So, understanding basic magic is absolutely essential. Everyone needed at least a basic understanding to coordinate with spellcasters when they're out on a real battlefield. Hearing that, Gray realized the teacher just wanted everyone to learn at least one basic spell so they wouldn't fall behind the mages. Odds were, it would be the ether projectile, since that was the most basic one of all. Overhearing him, the teacher jumped on the opportunity, asking if Gray already knew how to cast that spell then. Gray told him he did, mostly thanks to his training sessions in his past life. The professor saw a perfect chance to test this in a duel, and shockingly, the opponent chosen was none other than Leonhardt. No one quite understood why he made that matchup, but Leonhardt thanked the teacher, boasting that he was trained in magic alongside his swordsmanship. He even admitted he was a little worried about accidentally hurting his opponent too badly. The teacher reassured them both, telling Leonhardt to just hold back and cast a weakened version of the spell. After all, an ether projectile wasn't exactly known for doing massive damage anyway. Plus, his opponent was the special recruit chosen by Ariel, the famous wielder of the Divine Eye. That reveal shocked the whole crowd, since nobody had any idea Gray was connected to Ariel. Spilling the news like that felt a bit malicious, like the teacher was actively trying to provoke or test the kid. Now, knowing exactly who his opponent was, Leonhardt politely invited Gray to come down from the stands and step onto the field so they could give the class a proper live demonstration. The moment Gray stepped onto the center of the yard, he started worrying about his magic skills. He had practiced a bit in the past, but he still wasn't sure if he could actually pull off a spell under this kind of pressure. Still, he figured a basic projectile wouldn't kill him. But then, Leonhardt started casting his spell, and Gray had to react fast. If he didn't counter right away, he'd take the entire blast head-on. Both of them fired the exact same spell at the very same moment, but the sheer power gap between them was night and day. Gray's blast was so ridiculously oversized that it completely swallowed Leonhardt's attack, putting the boy's life in immediate danger. Things got so out of hand that the instructor had to personally throw up a barrier to absorb the impact. Despite that, the spell shattered the shield and slammed into Leonhardt, leaving the crowd speechless. He survived, but without the teacher's shield, he would have been killed right then and there. According to the instructor, that kind of devastating attack, an ether projectile, was beyond anything any student at the academy could unleash. Utterly stunned, he demanded to know what kind of spell Gray had actually used. Gray was just as baffled though, because Leonhardt's blast had seemed incredibly weak to him. It was nothing like the magic he remembered. He started wondering if the spells from his old training grounds were fundamentally different from what this school taught. To make sure, he directly asked the professor if he had actually cast the right spell. The teacher nodded, confirming it really was just a standard ether projectile. But what really set Gray's attack apart was its quality. He had fired a compressed ether projectile. It was a highly advanced spell that even the academy professors struggled to cast, making it almost useless in actual combat. This meant Gray was probably the only one in the entire academy who could pull it off. Even so, Gray found the whole thing bizarre. To him, every spell he learned during his training with the subjugation squad was just like this. And the strangest part? Back then, he was seen as the absolute worst of the bunch. Thinking like that, he actually asked if the professor was joking, convinced that anyone could do it with enough practice. But his question sounded arrogant, as if he thought he was above everyone else. This made the instructor burst out laughing. He then urged Gray to switch to the magic track, even offering to personally recommend him. But Gray turned him down on the spot, preferring swords and feeling way more comfortable with blade work. The professor insisted that the super compressed ether strike Gray had pulled off was just mind-blowing. In his eyes, Gray was easily the biggest prodigy the academy had ever seen, maybe even too skilled for this school. For the rest of the class, they were just as terrified as they were amazed, not just by the strike itself, but by the massive heap of praise from the instructor, who was famously harsh and almost never complimented anyone. The teacher even declared that if Gray didn't switch to magic, it would practically be a crime against magic itself, especially given the insane level of ether compression he just showed off. Hearing the words ether compression triggered a memory from Gray's very first life. He pictured a blue-haired woman explaining the technical details of how compression actually worked. Back then, that magic was incredibly hard to pull off because you had to keep squeezing ether inside your body, then pack it together using a substance called OD. That was when Gray asked his teacher if he knew what OD was, but judging by his blank reaction, the man clearly had no clue. This made Gray realize that this world still had zero knowledge of OD, which meant everything he had learned back in the subjugation squad was actually knowledge from the future. To Gray, these were supposed to be the absolute basics. As he stood there thinking, the teacher kept pushing him to switch programs. But once again, Gray turned him down, proving his passion for the sword beat any magic talent. Hearing that final answer, the instructor finally backed off, at least for the moment. He told Gray that if he ever had a change of heart, he should come find him. Finally, he sent Gray back to his desk, adding that he did not mind if Gray slept through class or just walked out, since the lessons were far too basic for someone of his level. After that crazy speech, the other students started looking at Gray differently. That massive display of strength did not go unnoticed, and the waves were already spreading. Even Leonhardt, who had been briefly ignored, showed a shocking shift in his attitude. He started treating Gray with deep respect, calling him Lord Gray, which made things pretty awkward. It was clear he was totally blown away by the incredible skill he had just seen. Soon after, Gray got called to Ariel's office. He figured it was about the classroom incident, especially since that teacher had been so desperate to get him to switch majors. The moment he stepped inside, a sudden ambush caught him completely off guard. Reacting purely on instinct, he blocked the strike, but looking at his attacker, he felt an odd wave of familiarity, as if he had met this person somewhere before. Right away, Ariel congratulated him, boasting that her gut feeling about him had been spot on. The teachers in the room started whispering, questioning if the girl who attacked him, Bella, had been holding back on purpose. When he heard her name, it clicked. That was Bella Albright, a legendary sorceress he remembered from his future life. Hearing the teacher's doubts, Ariel snapped back that they would have to be blind to miss what just happened. Ultimately, the instructors admitted defeat, handing over several coins to Ariel, which left Gray scratching his head. Ariel laughed and explained they had a bet running on whether he could survive Bella's sudden ambush. Since he won her the bet, Ariel tossed him a gold coin as a reward. It was a high-value piece, easily enough to support a family of 4 for 5 to 6 months. Watching Gray closely, the professors caught a very interesting detail. He deliberately blocked with his weaker arm, almost like he was shielding the other one. That move alone made them suspect he was hiding an injury. The sharp analysis honestly terrified Gray. He could not understand how they pieced together so much from a single glance. But when he questioned them, the professor replied that such sharp perception was the absolute bare minimum for anyone teaching at the World Academy. Ignoring their theories, Ariel cut in and ordered every single professor to get out, making it clear that Gray was her student. She would not hand him over or let them pressure him anymore. The instructors backed down, but right before they walked out, one of them dropped a serious warning. If Gray did not make a full recovery, his skills might fall below academy standards, triggering some major issues down the road. Once the room finally cleared out, Ariel looked straight at Gray and told him it was time to talk about magic. Sipping her tea calmly, she explained that she already knew the whole story, all thanks to a detailed report from one of the professors. That teacher's name was indeed Carlos, even though nobody had actually brought it up until this very moment. He was the one who went straight to Ariel, demanding that Gray get transferred into the magic department. But Ariel shut it down. She insisted that based on everything she saw with her own eyes, Gray belonged with a sword, not magic. She also pointed out that while his strike looked impressive, he did not actually look skilled with ether compression. Honestly, it looked like he had never even trained the technique before. Gray was quietly stunned by this. It proved Ariel's divine eye was the real deal, catching those tiny details without even trying. Then, she directly asked Gray to explain the exact technique he had pulled off. This was not just idle curiosity either. She had a very specific reason for asking. It all came down to the quiet girl standing next to her, leaving Gray so confused he almost blurted out that she was a witch. Ariel quickly explained that while Bella Albright was a genius with magic theory, she struggled terribly with putting it into practice. She could not even manage basic ether compression, much less the advanced super compressed version. So, when Carlos mentioned that Gray compressed energy without using traditional channeling, Bella instantly became obsessed with finding out how. Because of that, if Gray actually knew the secret, Ariel wanted him to teach it to her. If not, Bella would be handed over to Professor Bradley. Just hearing that name made Gray panic. Gray remembered Bradley as a sick criminal who ran brutal human experiments, causing magic disasters that took thousands of lives. He was widely feared as the most dangerous magic criminal in history. Even worse, the monster was still walking free. Ariel then warned that if Bella was sent to him, she would undergo a horrific surgery. On paper, it was a procedure to boost her magical talent, but behind closed doors, it was nothing but a sick human experiment. Ariel added that the horrifying details of these procedures had been completely covered up. Many subjects died on the table, while the survivors were left completely broken, as Ariel put it, meaning the poor souls lost their minds or had their magic burned away entirely. If Bella could not master super compressed ether by the end of the term, she would get expelled and they would have to send her straight to Bradley. Ariel had actually thought about smuggling Bella out of the school before things reached that point. But at this stage, pulling that off was practically impossible. Hearing all of this, Gray fell into deep thought. He knew a single word right now could rewrite the future. But seeing Bella's hand shaking, he remembered the dark fate he had to prevent. Right then and there, his mind was made up. It was better to risk an unknown future than to march toward a tragic end where everyone died. That is why he agreed to teach them both the super compressed ether technique. Sometime later, down in the arena, Gray began sharing his deepest magic secrets. He drew up complex theories on the board, explaining every detail, but made them promise never to share this forbidden knowledge with anyone else. To keep them quiet, Ariel stepped in and sealed the deal with a powerful magic contract. If they broke the rules, the contract would literally kill them. The things Gray was teaching were so incredibly advanced they gave Ariel a massive headache. Even grasping his concept of OD, a strange life energy, left her totally lost. Bella, however, was absolutely spellbound. Listening to him speak, she whispered that it felt like taking a class taught hundreds of years in the future. To her, Gray's mind-blowing theory had basically pushed the history of magic forward by years. Oddly enough, the concepts felt like they were coming from her own mind, almost like memories from a distant future where she had fully matured as a mage. Hearing all this, Ariel asked Bella if it was actually real, and Bella confirmed every word. So far, Gray's explanation aligned with current magical theory. Honestly, testing it out seemed way faster than standing around debating. If Gray's logic was actually sound, then the spell Bella was about to try should work. Combined with his new theory, this would unlock the girl's true power. Gray remembered Bella Albright's future potential as a sorceress, and going by his memories, her magic could easily level a whole city. The only problem was, she still had no idea. The moment she unleashed the spell, it was obvious she could have wiped out the whole city right then and there. Witnessing that terrifying power firsthand left Gray utterly shocked. Luckily, Bella managed to keep control of her magic, ensuring that nobody got hurt. She manipulated the flames with unbelievable precision, shaping the entire spell into a massive fire dragon. But she used way too much ether and blacked out. Still, Ariel found the feat absolutely incredible. She never expected Bella to pull off such high-level magic in such a short time. Even while passed out, Bella mumbled that she wasn't the amazing one, it was Gray's theory that did it. His breakdown made it easy for her to pull off the super compressed ether technique on her first try. It was actually kind of funny, because when you think about it, the theory was actually hers anyway, just from a distant future. But what mattered now was that mastering this meant Bella could skip the surgery, letting Ariel ask Professor Bradley to cancel her transfer. After all, if Bella actually went through with that surgery, she would gain massive power, but she would completely lose control. Ariel did not know how the limiter breaking process worked, but she knew the results were always highly unstable and incredibly risky. Hearing this, things started to click for Gray, explaining why. Bella could never control her magic in his past life. It was all a side effect of that operation. Now that Gray had held up his end of the bargain, it was Ariel's turn to heal his injured arm. Ariel cast a rare form of magic, summoning several healing butterflies to swirl around Gray's arm. Within moments, he realized he could move his arm freely again. He thanked her immediately, still stunned by the result, since no potion or standard spell had been able to fix the damage before. Ariel explained that her magic targeted nerve repair, which was far more advanced than basic physical healing. To make sure the spell actually worked, she had Gray swing his sword a few times. He threw a few slashes, but his arm still felt stiff. Ariel, however, had already expected this. She explained that while his nerves and bones were healed, there was still a deeper wound lingering in his soul. Gray knew exactly what she meant. While he struggled to grasp the concept, Ariel explained that even though modern magic could not prove the soul's existence, she knew it was real. After all, her divine eye let her see people's souls, proving just how incredible her abilities really were. Looking at him, she could see Gray's soul was slowly mending and would keep recovering as long as he did not overdo it. He could still practice his swordsmanship carefully, but Ariel wanted to know what caused such deep spiritual damage. That was when she remembered a warrior who also bound her soul to her swordsmanship. Her name was Amy White, a figure Gray recognized instantly. In the future, White was none other than the legendary sword saint. Watching Gray's reaction, Ariel realized she was missing a key piece of the puzzle. In fact, Gray's form mirrored Amy's style, maybe even outclassing the version of Amy he remembered from the future. With a few more years of training, she would likely match the incredible speed of the master who had trained him. There was still some debate over whether his style looked like Seria's or Amy's, but the truth was, Gray had a master of his own. To keep his secrets safe from Ariel, he simply claimed he learned everything at a small dojo back in his hometown. Still, the raw impact of his strikes proved that pure swordsmanship alone could deal serious damage. But Ariel argued that ordinary sword techniques could never achieve this. After all, basic techniques do not let you slay an ogre general with one blow, while simultaneously taking out nearby beasts and chopping down surrounding trees. This proved beyond a doubt that Ariel already knew Gray was responsible for that feat, and that exact knowledge was why she made that bet with Leon. Ariel also realized Gray had tapped into a mysterious power, something buried deep within his own soul. This shocked Gray. He had no idea how she could have even picked up on it, but she explained that she saw the energy leaking through some kind of chain door. This meant her eyes saw way more than normal people could. It was clear that Ariel possessed a rare, maybe even one-of-a-kind perception. When they got back to talking about Lyle, Ariel mentioned feeling a similar force before. It wasn't identical, but the aura felt very similar. Hearing this, Gray was completely hooked. He needed to know how anyone else could possess an energy so much like his. Ariel confirmed that yes, other beings carried this exact energy, though she couldn't say if they were human. If he wanted to know more, she revealed they were called the Liquidators. The moment he heard that name, Gray wondered why this was coming up now. It wasn't supposed to happen until much later. None of this made any sense. Seeing his confusion, Ariel asked how much he knew about the Liquidators. He admitted he only knew the basics. They were deadly threats to humanity who had to be stopped before they woke up. If that failed, they had to be wiped out at all costs. Ariel nodded, agreeing that the Liquidators posed an incredibly massive threat. Yet, researcher Balian Bradley was determined to keep pushing the experiments. Hearing that name, Gray immediately realized how bad things were. He had to know how Balian was connected to everything. Ariel then explained that a liquidator was the exact entity Balian was trying to summon. What made it terrifying was that Professor Bradley, someone they knew so well, was behind this plot. Up until now, Gray had zero clue the professor was trying to manufacture his own liquidator. Forcing himself to stay calm, Gray remembered something odd from his past life. The Academy knew exactly where the liquidator would show up. There was no way that was a coincidence. If they acted with such perfect timing back then, they might have been part of the summoning from day one. That chilling thought made Gray even more anxious. That was when he insisted they had to shut down this experiment before it was too late. Ariel agreed they had to act fast, but admitted she lacked the power to step in directly. After all, the mastermind behind the test was a fellow Academy professor, just like her. Because of that, her hands were tied. The only way to halt the project was a direct order from the Academy higher-ups. But she made it very clear that she couldn't share who those leaders were or drop any names. That roadblock took the wind out of Gray's sails, but then a crucial memory hit him. Balian Bradley was a criminal. In fact, back in Gray's previous life, Balian's illegal experiments had triggered the deaths of tens of thousands of people. If they could present that history as hard proof, maybe they could force someone to halt the trials. Gray tried pitching this to Ariel, thinking he found a clever workaround, but she shook her head. Sneaking into a lab run by an official Academy professor without approval was a major crime, and if they got caught without solid proof, they'd be labeled as common criminals, ending up locked in a cold dungeon, making an already bad situation even worse. Gray finally saw that Ariel knew all the risks, but her hands were completely tied. No matter how bad things got, she simply couldn't make a move on her own. So they parked the issue for now, and Ariel suggested shifting the focus to the raw power sleeping inside Gray. She asked straight up if he'd ever thought about mastering Lu, the name of that sleeping force within him. Gray blinked in confusion. He had no clue you could even tame a power like that. Ariel admitted she was in the dark too, but she knew someone who might have the answers. His name was Heathcote Longfellows, a strange name, but one that instantly rang a bell for Gray. He knew that name. That old man was the legend who had trained none other than the Sword Saint himself. An opportunity to train under a literal legend was way too good to pass up, so Gray jumped at the offer. The trouble was, the moment their training session actually started, Heathcote's methods threw him for a loop. The master just made him run back and forth with zero explanation. Despite his early excitement, Gray seriously started to doubt if this was going to accomplish anything. Worse yet, while he was running laps, the teacher seemed able to read his mind. The second Gray started thinking about anything, Heathcote would suddenly start yelling at him, shouting things that made zero sense. Yelling that he must run with his entire soul and empty his mind. It honestly felt less like actual training and more like some weird philosophy. Through all of this, Gray could not stop obsessing over Bradley's dark experiments, which kept moving forward day after day. He felt completely useless, doing these basic drills while a massive threat crept closer and closer to them. A bit later, inside Ariel's private office, she asked how things were going with Heathcote. Gray admitted that besides constant running and throwing a few quick punches at the very end, he was basically doing absolutely nothing. Hearing this, Ariel just nodded, saying she expected nothing less from a man like Heathcote Longfellows. But right as they were talking, a sudden letter was delivered to her desk. The second she scanned the page, her face dropped, instantly showing deep worry and shock. Once Gray read the message, he instantly got why she froze. The letter was signed by Balian Bradley himself. He claimed the Academy did not recognize the super compression technique that Bella had worked so hard to learn, meaning her scheduled surgery and the entire experiment had not been cancelled. It was basically a hidden threat. Bradley clearly wanted to force this dangerous surgery on Bella, leaving her with zero options. Gray asked why Bella could not just say no, but Ariel explained that was not an option. The contract she signed was packed with dirty loopholes. Her only real choices were to take the surgery or get kicked out of school. Because of this, Ariel admitted she needed Gray's help. She had to find the location of Bradley's lab, since finding real proof of his crimes would make the contract completely worthless and easy to destroy. But Gray pointed out that Ariel herself had warned him how dangerous it was to raid a lab without solid proof, yet she insisted she would figure out a way to grab the necessary evidence. Besides, she had already realized that Gray knew exactly where the lab was this whole time. Her special eyes made it easy to spot the truth without him ever having to say a single word. She could tell Gray was speaking the truth, hiding secrets nobody else could see. Right then, they resolved to blow the whistle on Bradley's wicked operations. The lab sat right at the peak of Towell Mountain, hidden inside an official Academy facility, making their mission incredibly tough to pull off. It served as the ultimate cover to keep up appearances. Other professors rarely poked their noses into another colleague's business, which explained why Bradley picked that spot. But if they could secure hard evidence first, they could easily avoid any charges of trespassing. As they mapped out their plan, Bella suddenly walked in, holding a letter of her own. Ariel tried to reassure her that everything was fine, but Bella grew increasingly worried, demanding to know if Ariel was going to confront Bradley by herself. Ariel confidently claimed she could handle it, but looking over at Gray, she immediately saw he had no intention of staying behind. He insisted on tag-teaming the mission, though Ariel warned him it was way too dangerous. They were targeting an actual academy professor, a monster who had already run horrific experiments on live humans. Entering that place meant facing unknown terrors, yet Gray absolutely refused to back down. That level of danger was exactly why she could not go in alone. He pointed out he could unleash the same power he used to crush the Ogre General, giving them a serious edge. Plus, if anything happened to Ariel, they would be expelled immediately as elite students tied to the Divine Eye project. Seeing how stubborn they both were, Ariel finally relented, setting one strict rule: they must keep themselves safe above all else. Not long after, they stood right outside the laboratory entrance on Torwell Mountain. Bella quietly asked if this was truly where Bradley ran his illegal experiments, and Ariel confirmed it was indeed the spot. They just had to find enough proof to nail him. Gray backed her up, and Bella, trusting them completely, believed it. Bradley was currently out of town, having traveled to attend a massive Magic Society conference. Since the front doors were likely rigged with nasty traps, they planned to bypass security by simply blasting a hole through a side wall. Bella felt a bit uneasy and asked if they should really be resorting to demolition. Ariel smirked, pointing out they were already breaking in. Blowing up a single wall was not going to make a difference now. Like she always said, once you are already crossing the line, another step forward barely matters. Still, Bella hesitated, asking Ariel if she was absolutely certain, since she was risking her entire life for her sake. But Gray cut in, telling her she was dead wrong. This wasn't just about Bella. Ending these experiments was crucial for the entire world. If they didn't act right now, countless lives were at stake. Ariel figured Gray was exaggerating a little, but agreed Bradley had to be stopped. She made sure Bella knew she didn't need to carry any guilt. Nobody in that room was risking their life, just for her. Decision made, Ariel, Gray, and Bella pushed forward. They blasted right through the lab's side wall with a massive explosion, definitely not a subtle entrance. They originally wanted to sneak in quietly, but that ship had long since sailed. The second they stepped through the rubble, it was clear they wouldn't have to look hard for proof. Inside lay a pile of lifeless bodies, a horrific scene that made Bradley's sick crimes completely undeniable. Deep inside the Torwell Mountain lab, Ariel uncovered 14 forbidden spells. Just like the name suggests, they were things that should never be practiced. They also came across a massive altar, obviously set up to perform some kind of dark ritual. Overwhelmed by what they found, Bella questioned their next move. The plan was to gather evidence and slip out quietly, but they were now facing something much bigger. Innocent people could still be trapped in here alive, which made just running away feel completely wrong. But Gray cut in, reminding them they were out of time. Bradley could walk in at any second, and if he caught them, they were dead meat. Right on cue, Bradley stepped into the room. It was a shock, since he was supposed to be away at a Magic Society conference. In reality, he had only sent a decoy in his place, likely using some kind of magical double technique. He claimed he had to keep a vital experiment running, especially since he just acquired fresh materials he needed to use quickly. But seeing Ariel, Gray, and Bella standing there meant he'd have to adjust his plans on the fly. The most chilling part was hearing him admit he was hunting for people with exceptionally high magical density. And as he saw it, fate was being generous, since his prime specimens had walked right into his hands. Nobody else knew they had come to the lab, meaning if they vanished right here, nobody would ever suspect him. Ariel, trying to keep her cool, asked outright if he planned to use them as lab rats. Bradley, with a creepy calm, replied that their sacrifice would push the absolute limits of magic, promising to make sure none of them went to waste. But before he could finish, Bella cut him off with a blast of wildfire magic. She wasn't about to hesitate when it came to protecting her friends, but Bradley shrugged off the attack effortlessly, mocking that the Divine Eye actually lived up to the hype, since Ariel's handpicked students were putting up a better fight than he thought. He even admitted he was slightly impressed by Bella's trick. Then he smirked, reminding her that trying to kill a professor is the ultimate taboo, playing the victim like she had committed some unspeakable sin. But all it really did was show just how arrogant and unhinged he'd become. Ariel knew they were totally outmatched here, and with the stakes so high, she ordered them to fall back immediately. They already had enough proof to bring Bradley down, so there was no reason to keep risking their lives. But Bradley wasn't about to let them walk. He instantly threw a massive surge of purple magic at them. Ariel managed to throw up a shield, but his spell was designed to eat right through magical defenses. The moment her first barrier shattered, she scrambled to cast another, knowing it would only buy them mere seconds. In a rush, Ariel pressed a small magic cube into Bella's hand. Stored inside were all the recorded images and memories that proved Bradley's guilt. She told her to deliver the cube to the decent body, the Academy's High Council that could judge Bradley's actions without bias. Bella's only job was to escape with that cube and expose the truth, but defying her teacher's direct orders, she flat out refused to run. Instead, she conjured a massive magical shield, locking all three of them inside. Ariel went into a panic, begging them to get out. That was the only reason she'd let them tag along in the first place. The plan was simple. Gray and Bella were supposed to pull back if things got ugly, but now, staring down a monster like Bradley, those rules were completely out the window. But Bella didn't need words, her actions said it all. Her newly built shield actually held, tanking the same magical blast that had completely shredded Ariel's barrier. This shocked more than just Ariel. It stunned Bradley himself, because the theory behind that defensive barrier relied on the Devouring Flame's anti-magic, a secret known only to an incredibly elite circle. No scholar outside that elite circle should have been able to cast it. Yet, here was Bella, holding the barrier completely steady. Stunned by this defiance, Bradley demanded to know exactly who had taught her that magic. Bella stood her ground, admitting she recently learned a new theory from someone, but refused to say another word. She only revealed her source was a swordsmanship student, keeping everything else a secret, which only made the professor more furious. He refused to tolerate such betrayal under his roof, so, without a second thought, he drew a bizarre stone from his robes, declaring that their defiance would get them all burned alive. Slamming the relic into the floor, he unleashed a brand new spell. Eerie magical skulls materialized alongside the blazing fire, massively amplifying his strike. Bella's barrier kept holding, but her mana was starting to run dangerously low. Meanwhile, Ariel used her Divine Eye to spot a structural weakness in Bradley's spell. She launched a focus strike at that opening, but the Devouring Flame consumed any incoming magic, rendering her efforts useless. Gray recalled that among the Academy's faculty, Ariel was easily the weakest when it came to offensive combat. The situation was spiraling fast. With Bella's mana nearly dry, they were trapped inside the very barrier, keeping them alive. Watching this desperate scene, Gray made his move and stepped ahead of the others. He announced that he would handle the offensive. Acting was far better than sitting back and dying together. In Bradley's sight, a crimson aura began swirling around Gray's signature energy. Suddenly, space itself seemed to warp. Before Bradley could draw breath, his throat was slashed. The sheer force of Gray's slash tore through everything, shattering the ceiling, the pillars, and the stone walls. The shockwave was so immense that a stunned Ariel had to shield them from the falling ruins. Watching him intently, she admitted it was her first time witnessing that power firsthand, and it was absolutely terrifying. That blow didn't just slice the enemy, it cut right through the fabric of their surroundings, as if tearing reality itself wide open. Once the dust settled, Gray muttered that his sword arm was throbbing painfully. Though numb and tingling, he could wiggle his fingers. It was clear progress, proving his body was finally adapting to the strain. Had he used it in his early days, back during his training in the village, he would have blacked out for days on end, just like before. It was wild how much that basic running routine was paying off. Ariel had a million questions, but held her tongue. Instead, she took a moment to apologize to him. She felt responsible for forcing his hand, making him wield a power he was warned to avoid. But Gray shrugged it off. He'd always maintained he would only tap into that strength as a last resort, and this definitely qualified. Even so, Ariel warned him not to unleash that dangerous ability again anytime soon. Pushing it too far risked permanent, irreversible damage. Cutting in, Bella asked him a point-blank question. She wanted to know what magic he'd used, since she hadn't detected even a trace of mana from his blow. It didn't feel like a standard spell at all, and honestly, calling it mere sorcery didn't fit. Deadpan, Ariel told Bella to drop the subject, warning her that pressing any further would mean having her memory wiped. That threat made Bella realize they were tangled up in something far more dangerous than she'd imagined. To protect herself, she offered a magical contract, ensuring she could keep what she knew without losing her mind. With the pact signed, Gray admitted that, while he worried about the victims of these twisted experiments, the priority right now was rescuing the survivors who were still lying unconscious inside the facility. They were clear of immediate danger, but Ariel explained that their best course of action was moving the survivors to the academy clinic. But since there were many unconscious victims and the ruins remained highly unstable from their intense clash, she conjured miniature personal barriers to keep every single one of them safe. These wards would protect them in case any structural debris or loose stones crumbled from above. This allowed the group to scour the rest of the site with some peace of mind. Scanning the dark chamber, they realized the disturbing equipment here was set up for human sacrifice. The dark rituals were designed to forge magical catalysts or siphon power into corrupt mages. It was absolutely sickening. Still, despite all those horrific crimes, they had found zero proof of the liquidator. That was starting to nag at Gray. He clearly remembered that in his past life, this very spot was where it all began. This was the exact spot where Bradley unleashed the catastrophe that killed tens of thousands. Gray paused, suddenly remembering a crucial detail. The actual cause of the mass casualties in his past life was not some spell, but a lethal miasma leaking from deep underground. Which meant the true threat was not sitting on the lab floor, but buried right beneath their feet. Thinking fast, Gray asked Ariel to scan beneath the floor. At first, she could not pick up a single thing. But once she activated her divine eye, she spotted a faint trace of teleportation magic roughly 300 meters underground. At that depth, there really should not be anything down there except solid rock and endless dirt. Yet, the moment they opened a portal using that magic trace, they were transported to a completely different place. This underground cavern was absolutely massive, like a hidden facility packed with small structures resembling strange capsules or cocoons. Looking around, Bella pointed out that the ether density in the air was completely absurd, and it was heavily concentrated inside a circular structure right in the middle of the chamber. Activating her divine eye once more, Ariel confirmed the bizarre energy was pulsing from the center, and there was no mistaking it. This was the power of the liquidator. This energy was a strange force that did not seem to follow any known rules of magic. Granted, the name liquidator was a bit confusing, sounding like either total destruction or some random kitchen appliance. But the fact was that the terrifying presence was very real and already active. Deep inside the main structure, they discovered a ritual door covered in glowing purple symbols. Someone had clearly tried to either lock it down or activate it. The rest of the chamber was completely empty. No trace of the liquidator, no monsters, and zero signs of life. The door was their only lead. Ariel calmly stepped forward and began to study the door. She explained that the threat was not the door itself, but the strange purple magic devices lining the outer circle. Since she was already bracing for a reaction, she did not flinch when the runes suddenly flared to life. Gray and Bella jumped as the magic suddenly surged, but Ariel did not even blink. Based on her analysis, the surge would only trigger a small tear in space exactly as she expected. Right on cue, the air warped, making it look as though space itself had briefly cracked. In the end, the ritual fizzled out. Ariel, who already knew this would happen, explained that those purple seals were not designed to summon the liquidator at all, but rather for something else. Something incomplete, or perhaps just poorly constructed. They had only managed to open a tiny rift to where he existed, and the conduit for that raw power was the central core, which literally crystallized human lives into pure energy. This meant those poor souls they saw earlier were likely sacrificed just to trigger this minor ritual. Horrified by this revelation, Bella demanded to know what anyone could possibly want with such a lethal power. Ariel pointed out they had actually seen this energy before, like in the black flames of Varian Teal and the crystal that boosted his attack power. Basically, that catalyst was not just limited to controlling fire, but amplified every single type of spell. Truth is, Bradley never intended to summon the liquidator in the first place. That was just a future accident. His real goal was to harvest the energy leaking from the rift, since it warped the very structure of known magic. The magic circles carved around the door had simply reached their breaking point, causing the whole ritual to fail. Still, just one look at the setup made it obvious that this equipment was insanely valuable. They estimated that just one of those glowing purple tubes was worth as much as an entire country. Studying the gear, Ariel began to suspect a massive organization was pulling the strings. Bella wondered if it was the Isgard Empire, but Ariel shook her head, stating that although the Empire was the mightiest superpower on the map, it did not have the cash or the magical muscle to build something of this magnitude. The only faction that could outclass the Empire in magical research was the World Union Academy. Bella was stunned, as it made absolutely zero sense for the prestigious academy to be mixed up in this. After all, that school was built to shield the world from danger, not brew it up themselves. Gray turned it over in his mind, wondering if the entire academy was now their enemy. In his past life, the academy's elite forces had fought on the very front lines to stop the liquidator. That proved that, at the very least, not everyone there was evil. Ariel explained that while most of the academy worked for the good of humanity, they still could not trust everyone inside. The place was packed with secret labs and researchers, hidden even from staff. Looking around, it was obvious Bradley had some serious backing from the start. The real problem was finding out who. Bottom line, they could not fully trust the academy. Worse, the scientists running these experiments probably thought they were heroes, making the whole thing even more dangerous. Even if the truth got out, it would easily be buried and forgotten. Gray was curious and asked Ariel if she recognized the magic circle. Activating her divine eye, she noticed there were no communication devices around. There was no signature magic left behind to identify the creator, proving whoever did this was incredibly skilled. As they spoke, a massive explosion suddenly rocked the entire facility. Within seconds, everything around them was completely obliterated. This was clearly a self-destruct failsafe, programmed to wipe out every single trace of the experiment. Panicked, Bella begged Ariel to stop overanalyzing the situation and run before they all got killed. But Ariel stayed totally calm. She said academy professors were not weak enough to die in a place like this. With that, she conjured a massive magic circle, wrapping it around the entire area. Just before the building collapsed, the spell triggered and teleported everyone, including the people she had protected earlier. Once they landed safely, Gray asked if that stunt was not way too risky. Ariel calmly explained that the teleport spell was delayed because of the extra weight from carrying so many people at once. Even so, she promised that once the Academy saw those mysterious tubes, they would not be able to ignore the discovery. Later, in the director's office, Alexander, the acting head of the World Union Academy, told them the survivors were safe in the medical wing and thanked everyone for shutting down Bradley's illegal experiments. Examining the purple tubes, he confirmed that each one was worth an absolute fortune. Ariel was curious how Bradley had managed to secure something so incredibly rare and restricted. Alexander explained those artifacts were actually stolen during a high-security transport operation, which ended in the deaths of 78 agents. That news reminded Ariel of an incident from 15 years ago, and Alexander confirmed it was the exact same case. It involved a syndicate known as the Blood Drinker, widely feared as the largest criminal network on Earth. Gray recognized the name instantly and went quiet as the scale of the threat sank in. Bella, on the other hand, was visibly shaken, realizing this very syndicate was responsible for murdering her parents years ago. The group was stunned. They were dealing with an enemy so powerful that even the Academy had no idea where they hid. Every time they wiped out one member, more quickly took their place, multiplying like some disease. Ariel suspected the Blood Drinker's influence had already crawled deep inside the Academy itself. Despite that, Alexander claimed there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. This made Gray furious. How could they know the truth and just sit there, powerless? Ariel explained, this was just how the Academy worked now. The institution's motto was simple: anyone with raw talent could become powerful, no matter their race, background, or past. That included criminals, as long as they held power. Furious, Bella argued that criminals should be punished, not rewarded. Alexander actually agreed, which only left the group more confused than ever. After all, if he was the director, why did he not do something? He explained he was just a substitute director, a puppet with zero real authority. The actual control belonged to far more influential figures in the shadows. According to Alexander, one of the senior students had enough clout to completely change the direction of the entire academy. If anyone could surpass that senior, they might actually change things. In this place, strength was the only thing that mattered. As he spoke, Alexander secretly turned the events over in his mind. He doubted Ariel was strong enough to defeat Bradley, leaving him wondering who really took him down. Ultimately, whoever was responsible did not matter. The fierce fire in Ariel's eyes showed she still had that same dangerous drive as before. He could not wait to see what they would become and what kind of monsters they might turn into. A bit later, Gray was walking through the halls of the World Union Academy, thinking about how much stronger he had to get. He needed to change the future and stop the tragedies of his past life from happening again. Lost in his head, he accidentally bumped into a guy who, without warning, swung a kick straight at his face. Gray reacted just in time to block the blow, but the impact sent him stumbling back. Confused, he tried to make sense of the sudden attack, but the kid just asked why he swaggered around like he owned the place. He sneered that a reject from the special admission program shouldn't wander freely. Hearing that, Gray immediately knew this was another student who despised the special admission candidates. The dark-haired guy with a smug face looked ready to start a fight, but the second he spotted Ariel walking over, he backed right down and walked away. On his way out, he muttered about security being tighter than usual, then dropped the name Varen, warning that someone was coming. Gray was left deeply curious. A moment later, Ariel walked up and asked what happened. Gray filled her in, and she noted that since the attacker didn't use any weapons or magic gear, she officially couldn't do anything about it. With a dry smirk, she added that if he chose to handle it himself, she wouldn't see a thing. But Gray passed, wanting to avoid pointless trouble. Curious, Ariel asked if the kids in the special admission group were actually that unpopular. Gray replied that usually, the hostility was just limited to mean comments and teasing, but this was the very first time things had escalated to actual physical violence. Hearing this, Ariel apologized, saying that if she had more power in the academy, they wouldn't have to deal with this mess. Gray told her not to worry, pointing out that without her help, he wouldn't even be at the school. Besides, he knew Bella and the other recruits would prove that the Divine Eye project was a massive success, not a mistake. Ariel was touched by his words, but she also warned him not to act like this was just someone else's problem. She made it clear that out of everyone she was mentoring, she expected the most from Gray. Those words put a massive weight on his shoulders. He knew she was comparing him to the legendary squad known as the Heroes of Humanity, but he couldn't help but notice the irony. That exact group had been wiped out with a single strike by the Liquidator back then. Worse, nobody actually knew who the mastermind behind that entire catastrophe was. Pushing those thoughts away, Gray headed to his next class for some sword practice. Inside, the students had to partner up based on a list pinned to the bulletin board. He knew this was his big chance to prove he could match the regular students, and finally shake off the disrespect he faced from being in the special program. The only problem? Gray got paired up with Leon, the absolute top student in the entire sword class. Besides being unbelievably talented, Leon had already shown his disdain for the special program, and the gap in their skills was absolutely massive. Walking in, Leon looked thrilled to be paired with Gray, but that grin on his face didn't look friendly at all. Deep down, Leon was pumped to finally test his real sword skills against Gray. But Gray took that grin as a threat, figuring the guy was just glad he could legally beat him up in practice. Soon, class started and the pairs were called up to spar. For Gray, the battle was intense right from the opening second. Leon pressed forward with sharp, aggressive strikes, completely controlling the flow of the fight, while Gray scrambled to dodge, block, and strike back when he could. The gap between them was night and day. Leon possessed flawless technique, fluid movements, and raw strength that made every single blow brutal to block. Yet, Gray lasted longer than anyone expected, all thanks to the brutal training he did with Professor Heathcote. But he was already sucking wind, while Leon looked completely fresh, without a hint of fatigue. Recalling his training, Gray decided to treat this like a real life or death struggle. So, when Leon lunged in with another direct attack, Gray slipped a blow at the very last second and lunged with a sharp thrust to the leg, catching him completely off guard. Though nicked, Leon refused to quit and tried to reclaim the lead, but Gray seized the moment and successfully cornered him. Ultimately, both boys ended up in winning positions, holding their blades at each other's throats. The match was called a draw, but Leon, smiling warmly, admitted he would have lost had Gray not held back that final blow. Gray muttered that even with the protection spell active, it still felt pretty weird to point a sharp blade right at a classmate's heart. Leon admitted he finally saw the real difference between them, and that fighting was not just about raw sword technique, but the sheer drive and mindset of the person holding the blade. Gray tried to brush it off, saying he basically cheated by using that sudden surprise attack, but Leon shrugged it off. The teacher had made it clear they were supposed to fight like it was a real, life or death battle. Before walking away, Leon made it very clear he wanted a rematch. Gray hesitated, knowing another round would probably end in defeat, but before he could even answer, a random student stepped in, interrupting the class. He started mocking Gray, saying he did not even belong here and was only acting tough because of some cheap magical powers. It was a cheap, petty provocation that only ended up annoying everyone else. Leon stepped in, putting himself between them and declaring that he was the only one allowed to fight Gray. Since the instructor had already set the sparring pairs, nobody else had the right to butt in. Watching this play out, the teacher decided to shuffle the matchups based on strength to make the upcoming duels much more balanced. Gray still had to duel Leon, but before that could happen, a new student stepped forward demanding to fight Leon. To get to him though, he would have to defeat Gray first, seeing how both of them supposedly shared a similar power level. The kid accepted instantly, totally sure he would win. Inside, Leon found it pretty funny because the guy was underestimating Gray exactly the same way he had. Still, Leon was annoyed that this random guy had hijacked his duel with Gray, and the sheer frustration was starting to break his cool. Meanwhile, the instructor pulled Gray aside to ask if he had an issue with real combat rules, where anything goes and you fight like your life is on the line. But since this was a basic swordsmanship class, the sparring had to be strictly limited to normal sword attacks, with controlled strikes and absolutely no magic. Sizing up his rival, Gray saw right away that he was physically outmatched. Even so, he was not about to back down now. He did not feel super confident, but giving up was never his style. He figured it would be great experience, and since he was already here, he might as well fight. The moment the match started, Gray parried the opening strike just to gauge his opponent's power. Strangely, he deflected it with absolute ease. This other guy did not seem to have much going for him at all. To test his theory, Gray launched a counter strike, and to his surprise, he practically sent the kid flying. He honestly assumed his opponent would easily dodge such a slow-looking strike, but it turned out the attack was still way too fast for him. Even flat on his back and bleeding, the boy dragged himself up and refused to accept the loss. He demanded another round, only to get thrashed again, taking hits like a helpless punching bag. Once the duel wrapped up, the practical sword class finally came to an end. The teacher selected Gray and Leon as class representatives. Confused, Gray asked what exactly that title was supposed to mean. The instructor explained that they held an annual tournament where the very best first-year students had to square off against the strongest fighters from the second year. Up until now, the freshmen had lost 35 times in a row, but after witnessing the skills of Gray and Leon firsthand, the teacher had a strong gut feeling that this year might go differently.